Picture this. The world looks at you and decides who you are, what you're capable of, and where your boundaries lie. But what happens when you refuse to play along? What happens when you aim not just beyond your own limits, but beyond the limits others think define you? Welcome back. It's good to have you here again. And today's session is all about breaking through the barriers of expectation and venturing into uncharted territory. Let's start with a story, one that might just change the way you think about your limits. Ask someone to name the greatest trilogy of all time, and chances are they'll mention either The Godfather or The Lord of the Rings. The journey to these cinematic masterpieces couldn't be more different. Francis Ford Coppola, the legendary director of The Godfather, was already a giant in Hollywood before taking on this magnum opus. His work on critically acclaimed films like Patton and The Rain People cemented his place as one of the greats. By the time he directed The Godfather, no one doubted his ability to deliver a masterpiece. The world expected brilliance from him, and he delivered. But Peter Jackson's story is far from typical. A filmmaker from New Zealand with a passion for special effects, his early career was an experimental playground. Jackson's childhood was spent filming homegrown projects with his friends, crafting his own props, and building his skills from scratch. His first feature film, Bad Taste, was a quirky mix of sci-fi, horror, and comedy. It became a cult hit, giving him a foot in the industry. Over the next decade, Jackson pushed boundaries in his work, releasing unconventional films like Meet the Feebles, Brain Dead, and Heavenly Creatures. Yet, nothing in his portfolio screamed blockbuster director. So how did someone with a track record of eccentric, low-budget films convince studio executives to trust him with $280 million to make a fantasy trilogy unlike anything the world had ever seen? Peter Jackson succeeded because he aimed far beyond the limits others placed on him. He didn't just love directing, he loved J.R.R. Tolkien's world of Middle-earth. Ever since reading The Lord of the Rings as a teenager, Jackson dreamed of bringing it to life on screen. His passion for the material burned brighter than any doubts about his ability. He wasn't arrogant, he was driven. There's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. Confidence stems from genuine love for what you do and a belief in your ability to bring something unique to the table. Arrogance assumes superiority without proof. Jackson's confidence was rooted in his love for Tolkien's work, his understanding of cinematic storytelling, and his belief that no one else could do the project justice. When Jackson first pitched his vision, studios weren't exactly clamoring for a Lord of the Rings adaptation. The books, while beloved, were considered too dense and niche for mainstream audiences. The late 1990s was an era dominated by edgy sci-fi, like The Matrix and the rise of comic book heroes. Fantasy? Studios dismissed it as a financial gamble. Jackson faced rejection after rejection. At one point, Miramax, the studio with the rights to the trilogy, demanded he condense the story into a single film. Jackson refused, unwilling to compromise Tolkien's vision. With his back against the wall, he turned to New Line Cinema. Here, Jackson made a bold move. Instead of presenting himself as desperate, he played the part of a busy and in-demand filmmaker, rescheduling meetings and creating the illusion of widespread interest in his project. The strategy worked. By the time he finally met with New Line executives, they were intrigued. Jackson didn't just pitch one movie. He pitched all three, laying out a detailed plan to adapt Tolkien's trilogy into a cinematic masterpiece. New Line took the gamble, giving Jackson a green light for the entire trilogy. What followed was a creative endeavor that rewrote the rules of filmmaking. Jackson collaborated with Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Steven Sinclair to condense Tolkien's sprawling narrative into something that could captivate both die-hard fans and newcomers. They preserved the heart of the story while trimming the excess, transforming literary magic into cinematic gold. The gamble paid off. The Fellowship of the Ring grossed $890 million worldwide. The Two Towers brought in $940 million, And The Return of the King shattered expectations with $1.1 billion, sweeping the Oscars and cementing its place in cinematic history. What can you learn from this? It's not just about aiming high, it's about aiming with intention. You don't succeed by blindly reaching for the stars. You succeed by finding what sets your soul on fire and pursuing it with everything you have. Peter Jackson didn't just aim to make a trilogy. He aimed to honor a story he loved deeply, and that passion resonated with millions. So, what's your Lord of the Rings? What's the goal that feels so audacious, so far beyond your current limits, that it almost seems impossible? Whatever it is, don't let doubt or fear hold you back. Love what you do. Know why you're the right person to do it. And when the time comes, don't be afraid to aim beyond anything anyone thought possible, including yourself. Because if Peter Jackson could turn homemade props and a love of storytelling into one of the greatest cinematic achievements of all time, who's to say you can't do the same in your own way?